think we will get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, which is Total Place, where we'll be exploring how organisations and local services can collaborate to build thriving communities. I'm John Dickin, Head of Neighbourhoods and Communities here at Bromford, and I'll be joined today by some of our brilliant guests who will introduce themselves in due course. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe to our YouTube channel at Bromford Lab, where you can access all of our previous webinars. Without further ado, I'll kick things off now with a question to our very own John Wade, Bromford's Director of Strategy. So John, if place-based working is all about reorganising Bromford's organisational structure to be more bottom-up, why are we talking to external third parties today?
Well, I guess it builds on the point you made in your introduction that we certainly don't profess to be place-based yet. It's very much a direction of travel and an aspiration. A number of us have been interested in a more bottom-up approach for some time, and what you can see on the screen is the output from a session done with some neighbourhood coaches in Lichfield, where it was just done by colleagues, and I think that's a key bit of learning for us going forward. This was where they literally had a big map of Lichfield and stuck all over it all the different community groups, services, facilities, social infrastructure that they were regularly in contact with or using in Lichfield, that customers use, that offer support or opportunities for customers. And I guess typically housing organisations think about themselves and their customers. They don't think much about the wealth of other organisations and community assets that are out there, many of which are run by or involve their own customers, that they're kind of largely invisible to the organisation and they don't feature in their planning, their strategies, their resource allocation. And as we're sort of flexing our muscles a bit in this space and learning more, we're really realising just how much is out there and how we need to reach out and make contact with people like Geoff and Mark and many, many others who are also becoming more part of their places, their community, and there's lots and lots we can learn from them. So that's why we thought it was good to get someone from public sector and someone from the private sector to come and share their story.
Brilliant. Thanks, John. I can see on that map, it's a community which is well served by lots of different services as well.
Yeah, I mean, services, but also, I mean, it's one of your phrases, John, just individuals within the community pollinators, those people that, you know, when we stop and think wherever we live, we kind of all know this person that just seems to have their finger on the pulse. You know, whatever the question, they know someone in the community that has got a ladder you can borrow, or knows what day the bin men come, or can help connect you up with somebody else who can solve a problem that you've got. So it's not just about services, but it's also about just ordinary people who live in a community and have something to share or offer. And it's how you identify those people, find those people, and help connect them up with each other and with our customers.
Brilliant. So that's some great context to today's session. So with that being said, I'm going to focus on our first case study. So we've got South Gloss Council here today. So Mark, can you introduce yourself and your role at South Gloss Council?
My primary role is to work with the voluntary and community sector and other partners to help support our communities in tackling inequalities. So whichever inequality it might be, yeah, we're working very hard to try and get that. Obviously, a key focus at the moment is on the cost of living pressures.
Fab. So when we started to have this conversation about today's prep, we were really, really interested when we heard about you referring to community conversations in South Gloucestershire. So where did this idea come from? And I guess the question is what was the problem it was trying to solve?
So the conversations, or the community conversations as it's branded now, started pre-COVID. Actually, a number of us in the organisation felt that we weren't doing this effectively. What I mean by that is a number of things, really. We were doing consultations where people couldn't really change the result. We were doing consultations where if people fed back certain things, we weren't replying to them. So they then got disinterested in ever responding. So the problem we were trying to solve is really understanding what the communities felt, what they really wanted us to do, and then responding to that in a positive way. It's very easy for people like myself to sit behind a screen and write a policy or an answer to something, but actually it's the people in those communities who really know what's best for them, and that's what we wanted to change. So we said we'd do this under the banner of community conversation, so that we're having an ongoing conversation. We don't have one conversation and walk away. It's an ongoing relationship, and we've driven that through, and lots has changed over the past 5-6 years since we started this, not least COVID, recognising the strengths of community organisations and people in communities to help one another, and we wanted to build on that.
Brilliant. What do they look like when you said they're not just one conversation, they're a constant thing? So is that a constant feedback loop? So your customers have the opportunity through every contact with the local authority to seek their views and opinions?
Yes, in short, I mean, it's not one thing, so it's a whole series of things. It's the culture of the way we do things in South Gloucestershire. So if we've got an environmental health officer or a housing inspector going out and about, and somebody in the community mentions something to them, they know they can bring it back, and then it's fed into a central point, and we're starting to analyse all that feedback so we really understand what the communities are saying, and then we're going back to them and saying, we've heard you, this is what we're now proposing we can do. Clearly sometimes we can't do everything that's being asked, so we'll go back and say that, and give the reasons why, because that black hole of no response is really frustrating for people, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is more of about quite a significant organisational shift for seeking the views and opinions of the wider community.
It is. It's very much so. And actually, our political administration, I don't know whether every person on the call understands the way local authorities work, but officers like myself do what our political members tell us to do in very short term. So our political leaders of the council have adopted a policy on community conversations to say this is the way we will do things going forward. So it's very much high level support behind this.
Brilliant. Sounds great. So I think we're going to move into the video just to explain and put a little bit of context in terms of what those community conversations are at a kind of operational level.
The community conversations is about bringing the voice of the community into decision making within the council. It is our commitment to engaging more effectively with residents and other stakeholders and encouraging participation. Not everyone engages with the council regularly, so they may not know that we want to hear their opinions or how to give them. We aim to make it easier for people to share their views and input into decisions so that everyone can get involved and play their part in making South Gloucestershire a better place. Of course, there is great work already going on across the council by staff and teams from all departments, meeting and engaging with residents every day, and we know and recognise the benefit of these interactions and what we can learn from them. Community Conversations is seeking more opportunities for direct engagement with our communities. We were at the Celebrate With Me Refugee Festival in Page Park in June, where we heard how happy many people felt because of the welcome they had received in South Gloss. Then in July, Community Conversations was present at the Yates Ageing Better Festival, organised by Yates Town Council, where we heard from local residents helping us to co-create an age-friendly strategy so that age is not a barrier to living well. And in August, What's on Your Plate toured the district shopping centres, bringing together a whole host of council services to share information. We were joined by NHS Talking Therapies, Woman Well and other partners. Most recently, we were at launch events with the Centre for Deaf, where people from the deaf community shared details of significant barriers they face accessing services, amongst other things. Sometimes the most valuable information comes from the most informal sources. Every time you talk to a member of the community or attend a meeting with a partnering organisation, you're hearing valuable feedback. We need to ensure that that information and insight is captured and shared so that we can learn from it, build it into service delivery and improve outcomes for the residents of South Gloucestershire. It's really important that we build on the strengths of our communities, learning from people with lived experience to ensure services are properly designed with and for those who use them or may be affected by them. This is known as asset-based community development. You can find out more on the intranet or email communityconversations@southgloss.gov.uk if you want to get more involved.
Mark, just go through that in a little bit detail and it just kind of put the context to that video.
Yeah, I will do. I mean, the starting context for that is, so that's my colleague Helen, and when I said these conversations started some time ago, Helen was one of the 4 or 5 of us who sat in the canteen here in the council offices saying, okay, how do we change that? And the short video, which obviously will circulate afterwards, people watch, Helen goes through describing what this means in practice about those two-way relationships that we can have. So every interaction you have with somebody in the council should be a way for us as a local authority to gather the intelligence on how people feel about living in the district, what's the good, the bad and the ugly, and what they think are the key things that would help change their lives, support them in tackling the challenges they face on a day-to-day basis. And the other thing I think is really key is a bit like Bromford, we're a really large organisation with lots of moving parts, and actually one of the challenges for us is talking to one another effectively and sharing that information, so that if I do a form of consultation in my area, I don't just keep it to myself, it's shared across the organisation, so it becomes organisational learning. And then we go back to the community to say we're hearing from you about this. I think there were some key things that came out for me. We did a massive consultation exercise, so we sent out something like 15,000 questionnaires, got over 5,000 responses, and we had lots of focus groups, so real people in a room having conversations with us. And some of the key things they said to us were, we're really keen to be involved in our local community and volunteer, but we don't know how. They don't really identify with South Gloucestershire as a place. They're really interested in their local street and maybe a little bit further beyond, but really their local place is what really interests them. Apart from when you get to things like National Health Service, public transport, they're really locally focused. The bigger things across South Gloucestershire, they're less interested in. So that was a really interesting lesson for us, is we've got lots of people who are really keen to be involved. How do we tap into that? We really need to focus on that place-based local agenda, because that's where people are interested. That's where their focus is in their neighbourhood. And the other thing they said to us was, and this is probably going to say a little bit patronising, is treat us as adults, have an open and honest conversation with us. You know, we know there are pressures, we know there are systems. If you can't do something, tell us. I know that sounds really obvious, but that wasn't something that we were particularly good at historically, is being really honest. We can't do this because, or we've got to save money. This will mean you're going to have a reduced level of service in this area. So, you know, really, really productive conversations, and our elected members really have brought in to help us tackle that.
I think you've raised some really good points there, and the point around almost that element of communication, that feeding back, being honest, keeping people up to date, and being really transparent in terms of what we can and what we can't do. I guess I've got a question in terms of, was there anything that really surprised you that came out of these community conversations?
I think there were two things that came out massively for me. The points I've raised is people are desperate to help out in their communities. They've got capacity in their minds for volunteering, but they just don't know where to go. What do I do? What's needed in our area? And because I think we've battled for years in getting volunteers, and COVID's really influenced that in organisations. That traditional demographic of volunteers is changed. So how we really tap into that was really important. And that sense of place, it just means so many different things to different people, but that really hyper local approach is really key.
And you referred back to how this has kind of made such a significant impact in terms of how the local authority is moving things forward. So it'd be really good to hear about that feedback and how that has really influenced your strategy moving forward.
Yeah, so I mentioned the community conversations engagement and participation strategy as it is now. So we've adopted that, and that's the first formal strategy we've had in the council. And then linked to that, we've got the slide up in front of you about asset-based community and development. So we were really keen to focus on what the strengths are in our communities and work with them, but we didn't want that to be a council piece. So we worked with an organisation called Locality, and they liaise with the health system locally, town and parish councils, voluntary and community sector organisations, a whole range of people, including ourselves, and said, these are the things that we think make a really good approach to asset-based community development. And all of us as partners have agreed to that. So it can feel like a South Gloucestershire Council document, but it isn't. It really wasn't written by us. It was written by all of us as partners. And I think that's a key part of that community conversations approach. It's not about the council, it's about all of us within South Gloucestershire and all the partners.
That's great. I think that's it's a really interesting piece that you've utilised the skills and the existing resources and the people within those communities, listening to what's really important to then drive things forward. So thank you very much for that, Mark. That's a great piece. So with that being said, we'll move to our second case study, which is Gloucester Brewery. So Geoff, who are you? What is your connection to the local kind of Gloucester Brewery? And I guess, what is the problem that you were facing at the time?
Okay, so Geoff Smith, so I specialise in transformation and change. I'm now just a shareholder in the brewery, but for 18 months I took on the operational aspect as managing director after the brewery had hit a particularly tricky spot coming out of COVID. And a lot of people are aware of the decimation that caused in the hospitality sector. Gloucester Brewery was affected by it quite badly. It managed to get through, but had left the business in a very stressed position.
And I guess, what did you do on the back of that?
The first thing was really to understand what was going on and what wasn't going on as well, more importantly. So we identified the trading position of the business, but also we looked at the engagement of the business, and that was really the focal point. We had a venue that wasn't full a lot of the time. So for example, during the daytime, when people were in brewing beer, the venue side of the location was empty from 8 in the morning, typically till 4 or 5 in the afternoon. So that was space and time that was going begging. Could we utilise that for better means of revenue generation, to do something else with it? And likewise, our footfall generally was low in that main location, and also our secondary location, which was in the centre of Gloucester as well. So we identified there's a need to support local organisations, and a lot of that was driven by, as soon as I came in post, I knew a lot of charity organisations in the area, community groups. So I started to get emails asking for donations for raffle prizes, for auctions, etc. And as a business, the business couldn't sustain literally just donating. So we looked at how we could do something that would support those groups, but also would help us, so a symbiotic relationship. And that's where we started off, by the space element that we had and the venue space, by allowing and inviting charities, community groups, council, college to come in and utilise that space when it wasn't being used, to use that for fundraising, to use that awareness, to use it for training. And through that, we came up with a relationship where we would donate that space and the staff for that. The charities, community groups would use that for their benefits. So they'd have raffles, they'd have fundraising nights, they'd have bands in, etc. They'd charge people for that. That money went to the charity. We'd retain the money that we generate on the bar, so there's something in it for everybody. Through that, what grew from that was both sides of the relationship promoting that, the reach for us as a business, or the charities or the community groups, transposing to the other party's reach. So in terms of that engagement, that grew. And then we started focusing on feedback we were getting from the initial participants in that. And one of the key elements from the charity sector was, it's great working on a one-to-one basis with a charity, but there was a reticence within the charity sector to collaborate, and there wasn't anything bringing people together to share best practice. And although we'd been sort of picking up and helping people on that one-to-one basis, we recognised that there's a gap there. So we worked with people like the Gloucestershire Community Foundation, and we worked with the CEO there, Talitha, a lady called Nikki Budding, who's quite prolific in terms of engagement in the area as well, again from private sector coming in. And we started to hold workshops and networking events solely for charity leaders to come together. And from that sort of grew, and we started doing more fundraising events. People who come to the fundraising events would then come back to the brewery itself, so then started becoming customers of ours. Customers of the brewery would see the charity events on, come support those. So it really started to grow and snowball. The net effect was our trading went up. We went from loss making to profit making. We cleared a lot of debt. We helped secure 50 jobs in the local area. But also from a charity perspective, through the direct engagement we had over a 12-month period, we supported local charities and community groups fundraise over £125,000, which then was a significant investment into that sector. Again, something that had been hit badly during COVID and the cost of living crisis, with donation and revenues going down. An injection of 125k within the Gloucestershire areas was quite a significant impact.
That's an amazing achievement. And when you kind of think of breweries, other than thinking of alcohol, you don't necessarily think about the wider piece of work that they're doing with the community and all of the partners and the impacts they can have locally. So that's an amazing achievement. And when you spoke about improved kind of outcomes, it would be great just to hear a little bit more from you in terms of, the impact this had in the community and the wider partners as well. So has that been sustainable?
Yeah, so it's sustainable. So if you look at the brewery at the moment, they're still very heavily engaged. Holly Gazzard, the charity, had an event there last week. Nick Gazzard, who was recently awarded an OBE, had a celebration there. There's a charity firewalk going on with 4 charities at the end of this month. So if anybody wants to sponsor me to do that, they're more than welcome to. And there's also a lot of community groups still using it. So some of the things away from charities we focus on as well is where Gloucester Brewery is based, right in the centre of Gloucester Docks, right next to us is Gloucester College. You can see from the picture there that the buildings that the brewery is housed in are Grade 2 listed buildings, dating back to 1891, where it was built originally by the Fox family, but not in a state of particularly good repair throughout. So we set up a partnership approach with the Gloucestershire College next door, where they've got trade training going on and they needed practical experience. We needed some support helping to maintain and develop the facilities there. So we were able to bring groups of young people in going through their apprenticeships, learn practical trades, and they could apply those to the brewery, which then gave us the benefit back. With people who were doing art and photography courses, we enabled them to display their works and hold their exhibitions within there and open that up to the public. So we worked on that with the college. We worked on it also with an art in the community project as well with Gloucester City Council. So again, we're starting to help people expand their reach and more people understand about what's going on. Some of the other things that we hosted were support groups, so Age UK and Sue Ryder, where they hadn't got facilities to host some of their support groups and networking in the city centre in Gloucester. We then provided them a venue where they could come and have a safe, warm space, have an element of segregation so there could be a safe space for communication and talking around some of the things that they covered in the groups. And again, we enabled that. Worked very closely with the BID, so the Business Improvement District. So what could we do in terms of improving the area? So a lot of BID meetings have been held at Gloucester Brewery and used as a focal point. We got heavily involved in the Tall Ships event and helping support the organisational side of that. And really then started to build those impacts in, and those impacts, although I'm not in an executive role within the business anymore, is those impacts still continue under the current managing director, Kai Reeves. So they're continuing to sustain and developing those through.
So a very local organisation, but with a very big footprint within that community, which is making a significant difference to people's lives.
Yeah, certainly. And that was, the nicest piece about the whole thing was, yes, the brewery, it helped the brewery and sustain it and help it grow, but the impact in the community was really far spread. Working with, just in Gloucester alone, there's 4 Rotary clubs. We worked with each of those Rotary clubs, supporting them with their various elements and to expand their reach. We worked with Gloucester Cathedral. We worked with the Ukrainian church to provide some support, some aid work over to Ukraine, and at the time help promote the cause that was going on there. And really with that, it started to self-generate, working with Gloucestershire Gateway Trust as well. We started to be able to offer placements for people coming through the training programs they provide, for people trying to get back in employment and also escape some of the areas of deprivation within Gloucester itself. Within Tuffley and White City, they're in the top 2% areas of deprivation in the UK. So for us to be able to offer work placements, work experience for people trying to improve their skills and move on from there, that was a great element to sort of support in. Gloucester University and Hartbury University and College, again, offering them placements to come and work, small tasks to support with things like marketing and promotion, get some practical experience in hospitality. It really sort of grew the presence and grew the visibility of the brewery on the back of that as well.
With that being said, and on the theme of thinking total place and the impact of our communities and the strength of our communities, just a session that we did at Bromford with a group of engaged customers. So this was about encouraging customers and ourselves to think differently, including how we can provoke change in a community by working with not only Bromford, but our wider organisation. So thinking about what Mark and Geoff have said, using the strength of people in those communities to support us with our aims and ambitions. And as part of this exercise, we created a bit of a map with a made-up place, and we included a really randomised co-op wellbeing index score, which you can see at the bottom right there, and explains that the place was made up of some different demographics. So 30% unemployed, 40% over 65, and 30% were working families. And the task was to focus on and improve 3 areas of the co-op wellbeing index score. So we focused on health, relationship and employment. But there was a catch, that when we asked the group to do this, we said you can only spend a limited number of points on the solution. And all of those solutions are at the top right there in that grid. So there's circa kind of 40 solutions, from GP surgeries to allotments to improved transport links in schools and shops. So as you can imagine, there were lots and lots of debates, lots of people with different views and opinions. But what was really, really interesting, and some of the outcomes of this, is customers were looking at creating more innovative and creative ways to have the biggest impact for all demographics. So they were thinking, in the context of this webinar, total place, and recognising that community is about everyone who lives in it. What they also came back was communal space that is seen as a central hub and a meeting space. So highlighting the important role that they play in communities in terms of connecting people to feel part of a place, a community, and into local services. And we've already heard from Mark about, and Geoff, about how places can form part of those hubs as an enabler. They also focus on good transport infrastructure. So that was seen as essential, especially for work, accessing services, and for general well-being. And finally, what was really telling as part of this exercise is to never underestimate the power of listening to customers and our communities. So whilst this was only, a made-up task, it highlighted that listening to customers and communities where they live will allow us to have a really deeper and more meaningful understanding of their wants, needs and aspirations, which will in effect lead to better outcomes and more successful and thriving communities. So, John, what is the vision for Bromford's engagement in places where we have homes? And thinking about our strategy, how can we bring together different pillars of our strategy?
Well, going back to the slide we showed of Lichfield, I think what's really interesting in a relatively short time, how that exercise of kind of asset mapping, as it's called, was done entirely by colleagues, people who work for Bromford. And I think where we're getting to now through the session that you've shared on the screen here, and we've got a couple of trials coming up. The first one's going to be in Staple Hill, where it's going to be people who live in our homes, but people who live in Staple Hill but don't live in one of our homes, councillors, community groups. It's no good just thinking we can come up with the answers. We've got to talk and engage with and listen to all kinds of voices and representatives from within a place to get a really rich sense of what's going well, what's not going so well, what's missing. And then we want to use the insights that we get and what we hear from within any given place to push back up into Bromford and start to have more impact on things like the new homes that we build, to make sure we're building things that are needed in a place. We're not just building 3-bed houses if what's needed is bungalows or 4-bed houses. That the voice from within the place is influencing how we prioritise the investment we make in existing homes, and indeed some of those other things that are kind of fall outside the sorts of investment that we typically talk about. So we have kind of life cycles for kitchens, bathrooms, windows, roofs, but some of the things that people living in a particular place really want us to focus on. In Staple Hill, we've got an issue with a lift, so replace the lift, sort out the rubbish disposal, get rid of a park bench that is attracting kind of unwanted use in the evenings, clear trees and stuff that's blocking walkways, things that sat in an office miles away looking at our investment plans, we're not going to pick up. But when you actually get out and talk to people on the ground, they're the things that people want you to sort out first. Yes, they do want their bathroom replaced eventually and their kitchen replaced, but these practical things affect their life kind of every time they set foot outside the front door. So they're really, really important. And not just talking to customers and seeing the people that we live in our homes purely through the lens of being a Bromford tenant, but thinking about them as a citizen of a place. And I think it's really interesting what Mark was saying from the community conversations in South Gloucester, that people don't identify as living in South Gloucestershire, they identify as living in Staple Hill, Kingswood, Yate. And similarly, being a Bromford customer is probably way down the list of most people's ways of identifying and thinking of who they are as a person. We just provide the home. They're first and foremost a member of a place, a community, with their network of friends, clubs, employment, hobbies. That's how they self-identify, not just as a Bromford customer. So I think we've got to engage with far more people, far more groups, far more organisations to get a rounded picture of what's needed and what's already working well in a place, and then building that up into having a real impact on decisions that we take, often a long way away, that affect what it's like in those places. So as you said at the beginning, very much the beginning of this, but it's starting to happen, and it's really exciting what doors it's opening and what opportunities it's leading to.
Thanks, John. If anyone has any questions that they would like answering by the panel of kind of Mark, Geoff or John, then please do pop those in the chat. I've got a question that I want to ask Mark. So Mark, how many customer conversations have you had, or community conversations have you had so far?
A brilliant question. We haven't added them up, but if you think we've got somewhere in the region of 3,500 staff, vast majority of which are out and about during the week having conversations, you can quickly see how many conversations we are having on a daily basis. If you're all talking about formal engagement events, we've been to a lot over the last year. So for instance, we attend the local Pride event, we will go to community fairs and fetes and talk to people. We will run specific sessions for different parts of our communities. Say we've got actually in South Gloucestershire a large proportion of British Hong Kong residents who've settled into our community, so we do specific events with them, and then we do specific events with our disabled members of our community, LGBTQ plus community. So it's a whole range, John. So that was a bit of a waffly answer to say I don't know the exact numbers, wasn't it?
It's absolutely fine, but I think what it does say is all these conversations are happening, and they're happening at scale across all of the area, which is great to hear.
There's a question here from Chris Kinnear asking about sort of the detail of the exercise that you did, John.
I have got a pack that we can supply as part of the webinar. So in terms of the points, it was 100 points that was given as part of the task. But what was really interesting is the customers didn't spend the 100 points because they were looking at really creative ways of identifying solutions. So a hub could be served by a range of demographics and people, as opposed to creating a space for those specifically. So it was taking quite a holistic approach to the interventions that they would do to support their communities. So we have one more question. I think this one is to John Wade. So John, do you have any thoughts on how to measure the impact of working in a more place-based and partner-based approach?
Yeah, well, so at the moment, we're at the very early stages where we've got 2, and then starting next week, we kick off a 3rd place team. And the main thing we've been sort of trialing there, and the main measures of success, are customers telling us that we're getting better at communicating with them, picking up Mark's point about things disappearing into a black hole? Are we doing what we said we would? Are we listening and addressing the things that customers are telling us they want addressing in their place? And also testing what it's like for colleagues working in a different way. So colleagues from all kinds of different teams, but based in a place and serving that particular place. And certainly our evidence so far from the 2 live pilots is on both counts, it's made a massive difference. So the backlog of repairs is gone. There's been no complaints resulting from any of the services provided by that place-based team. We're responding to repairs much more quickly. Colleagues from different roles are sort of working together, being much more agile and collaborative in how they deal with things. And some issues that have hung around for years and we've struggled to get to grips with them, the place teams are getting on top of them and dealing with things, much more quickly and in a much more responsive way. There will be lots of other measures of success as we start to, as I say, influence what new homes get built, what we invest in. But in the short term, it's testing that. Does it make a difference to customers and colleagues? And yes, it does.
We've got a question from our very own Paul, who's in Vietnam. So long distance question, he said. A big challenge is engaging community members in this conversation due to lack of trust or perceived lack of historic action. What are the panel's top tips? I'll start with Geoff.
Good question, and welcome from Vietnam. I think there's a couple of things with this. I think first of all, it's been about open and actively listening to somebody who's approaching you with something to make sure, you're not just giving a nodding dog like the Churchill advert and you're sitting there. You're actually listening, you're engaged with them to understand what the question is and any historic issues or perceived issues that they're faced. Trying to address something you might not always be able to address it, you might not always be able to provide a solution. But I think the other aspect is not just listening to somebody, it's that onward engagement. So if you can help them, going back and explaining how you can help, what you can do, and a timescale and what to reasonably expect. But equally, if you can't help or if there's nothing that can be done, equally feed that back, but also explain why. And quite often when you take the time with people to engage and you're open and you're transparent, they'll respect you as much for that as well as they will for you actually getting a solution. So what people quite often want is they want that engagement, they want to be understood, they want to be heard. And people, if you're quite reasonable with them, will understand if there's something you can't actually do if you take the time to give them some explanation to the reason why. Yeah, Simon Sinek is a very good exponent. He's got a book called The Power of Why. Recommend that for anybody on the panel to read. And rather than what you can do or how you can do it, why you do it or why you would engage it in that manner is a very powerful approach to take. And it's the difference between buying a Dell computer and an Apple computer. A Dell computer is a what, an Apple computer is a why, because they both do the same thing. But one costs you a lot of money, is very shiny, very pretty. The other one's fairly straightforward and run their mill. No difference between them, but you buy the Apple because it's aspirational, it's smarter, it gives you a bit of status, that sort of thing. You buy a Dell because it's functional and delivers what you want. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, they both give you the same outcome. A little bit deeper than the actual question. So sorry for digressing a little bit.
John, I think I'd add that there's no quick fixes here. I think, as Paul's kind of implied in his question, there isn't great trust often between kind of tenants of a housing association and the organisation. People feel let down, feel like we're not responsive, that they don't know what's going on. So we can't expect to do a quick, gear change, work in a different way for a few months and expect everything suddenly to be all sorted out. It's a relationship, and you have to work hard to mend what can be a damaged relationship, and that takes time and commitment, and you just got to keep going at it, and gradually people will see you do what you said you would and begin to rebuild that trust. It just is not going to happen overnight. It's no good expecting the pilot in Staple Hill's, the first one. It's only been going since August last year. It might be years before we can walk around Staple Hill and go, I think we're in a really different place now. The relationship's completely transformed.
Just to close things off, Mark, is there anything that you would like to add in relation to that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple. I mean, I agree with what Geoff and John have said. I completely echo those comments. Two things for me. I think we have to acknowledge where we've got things wrong, historically or at the moment, and be really honest about that and say that, because I think that helps to build that trust and respect. The other thing I think is we sometimes forget that this is about people. So listening to people and their stories is really important. I can write a process, I can report on stats and figures and data, but actually it's that feedback from people and what difference it makes to them or not that's really important. And we have to keep people at the centre of everything we do.
Brilliant. Thank you. Just want to say a big thank you to Mark, Geoff, and John for your contributions today. So that's been really, really insightful. So feel free to reach out to us, ask us some kind of more questions that you may have as part of this. Our next webinar is next month. So if you look at that QR code there, please feel free to sign up to the next webinar, which again it's the next stage of our place and what our place vision may look like. So that's all from us. Thank you all for attending and have a great weekend.